In the vast darkness of the cosmos, war is the only constant. Humanity, a young but fiercely determined species, has taken to the stars not as conquerors, but as survivors. The conflict began as a desperate struggle for existence against the Zalvari, an ancient and terrifying alien race with a 1,000-year head start in technology and warfare. What started as a skirmish in the outermost colonies soon turned into an all-consuming war spanning entire sectors of the galaxy. The Terran High Command, recognizing the impossibility of direct technological superiority, turned to the one advantage humans still possessed: adaptability. Earth's finest soldiers were trained for a war unlike any fought before, armed with weapons that could tear through the hardened exoskeletons of the Zalvari and protected by combat suits that allowed them to fight in the crushing gravity of alien worlds or the vacuum of space. But the greatest weapon humanity wielded was time itself. The discovery of relativistic travel changed everything. Human soldiers, deployed on warships moving at near light speeds, experienced time dilation to an extreme degree. What felt like months to them were centuries to those left behind on Earth. While the soldiers fought in the trenches of alien worlds, humanity evolved at an exponential rate. Each time a company of Marines returned to Earth for resupply, they found a civilization unrecognizable from the one they left behind. The people they once knew were long dead, their families mere names in the annals of history. But humanity had not faltered. With each passing century, new technologies, new strategies, and new ideologies emerged. Soldiers who left Earth with rifles returned to find their replacements wielding energy weapons and tactical AIs that thought thousands of times faster than a human mind. The Terran fleets they once served in had been replaced by dreadnoughts the size of cities, equipped with weaponry that could shatter planets. But while technology had advanced, the war had not ended. The Zalvari, just as stubborn, just as determined, continued their own arms race, matching humanity strike for strike, warping across space in an endless cycle of destruction. Among the countless warriors fighting in this war was Captain Elias Kane, a soldier who had once been a simple infantryman in the early days of the war. For him, only 20 years had passed, but for Earth, over 5 centuries had come and gone. The world he fought for no longer resembled the one he swore to defend, yet still, he fought, driven by duty, by honor, and by the ghosts of the past. His battalion, the 42 ND Helljumpers, had seen history itself unfold in fragments, battle after battle, watching humanity evolve into something unrecognizable while they remained relics of an ancient past. As the war pressed on, the true horror of their existence became clear. They were no longer human in the eyes of those they protected. They were artifacts of an outdated generation, soldiers clinging to an ancient war while the people of Earth had moved on, questioning whether victory was even possible or if the war itself had become an inescapable cycle. The High Command, composed of minds that had never known a world without war, continued to send them into the abyss, throwing them into battles that erased entire solar systems. The Zalvari, once thought to be mindless conquerors, were revealed to be just as trapped as humanity. Their own civilization, bound by traditions older than human civilization itself, refused to yield. They too had soldiers frozen in time, warriors who had fought for millennia, just as lost in their own history. When Kane captured a Zalvari commander, he saw in the alien's eyes the same exhaustion, the same hollow duty that had consumed his own soul. But peace was impossible. The war had become a machine, grinding forward with no end in sight. The soldiers who had fought the first battles were long gone, their replacements fighting with weapons they did not understand, following orders given by leaders who no longer cared for victory, only survival. Then came the final order. A plan centuries in the making, designed by minds who had never set foot on a battlefield. A weapon of unimaginable power, capable of ending the war in one final stroke, but at a cost too great to comprehend. Kane and his battalion, thrown into what was supposed to be their last mission, faced a choice: follow orders and erase the enemy from existence, or defy the very civilization they fought for and become the last hope for peace. The decision would shape the future of not just humanity, but the galaxy itself. Would they choose annihilation? Or would they break the cycle and find another way? Kane stood aboard the bridge of the Valkyrie, staring at the holographic projection of the target system. It was a binary star system on the edge of the galactic frontier, a place that had no name, only a designation in the war logs, Grid 17X. The Zalvari homeworld lay at its heart, a planet untouched by battle, shielded by layers of defenses that had held against humanity's most devastating attacks. For centuries, Terran High Command had sought a way to break the Zalvari. Every battle had led to this moment. The weapon they now carried, codenamed Final Dawn, was unlike anything ever deployed. The details were classified even to Kane, but the whispers among the crew spoke of something beyond nuclear fire, beyond antimatter. A weapon that did not just destroy, but erased. Elias Kane had seen enough war to know what that meant. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Arya Voss, stepped beside him. Her face, hardened by years of conflict, held none of the awe the younger officers displayed at the sheer scale of the operation. She had fought with Kane since the early days, and like him, had seen civilizations rise and fall in the blink of an eye. "You don't trust command," she said. It wasn't a question. "I don't trust anyone who's never bled for this war," Kane muttered. "Every time we return, it's like we're ghosts. The people giving the orders now weren't even born when we first shipped out. They talk about victory, but all they know is escalation." Voss exhaled. "This isn't war anymore. It's annihilation." Kane knew she was right. This wasn't about strategy, about gaining ground. If Final Dawn was deployed, there would be no Zalvari left. No future, no surrender, no negotiations. Just silence. The officers behind them murmured, exchanging glances. They were veterans, survivors of countless battles, but the weight of this mission was different. Some believed in the cause. Others, like Kane, felt the weight of history pressing down on them, the knowledge that they were about to cross a line no soldier should cross. The Zalvari fleet had already begun to mobilize. Long-range sensors picked up massive formations, ships larger than anything humanity had seen before. They weren't retreating. They knew what was coming, and they were ready to die fighting. A message came through. Not from Earth, not from High Command, but from the Zalvari themselves. It was something that had never happened in the history of the war. Kane hesitated before accepting the transmission. The hollow projector flickered, and before him stood a Zalvari unlike any he had seen before. Its exoskeletal armor was dark and weathered, its many eyes holding something unfamiliar: recognition. Understanding. "I am Executor Varesh," the alien spoke in a deep, resonant tone. "And you are Elias Kane, the one who has fought us for centuries." Kane clenched his jaw. "You know my name. We know much about you. You and your kind are trapped, just as we are. This war is no longer fought by those who began it. We are both relics, sustained by a machine that cannot stop itself. Your leaders do not seek peace. They seek oblivion. And soon, there will be nothing left to fight for." Silence filled the bridge. "What are you asking?" Kane said. Varesh's mandibles tightened. "A choice. Surrender is impossible. But destruction is not the only path. There is another way." Kane exchanged glances with Voss. Every instinct in his body told him this was a trick, but something in Varesh's words struck deeper than deception. A soldier knew when an enemy spoke the truth. The alarms blared. Command had overridden their systems. Final Dawn was primed. They had minutes to decide. Would they follow orders? Or would they change the course of history forever? Kane felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The moment had come, the moment where he had to choose between obedience and conscience, between duty and the survival of something greater than his own species. The bridge crew looked to him, waiting. They were soldiers, but they were also human. And somewhere, buried beneath centuries of war, humanity still had the capacity to choose. Varesh stood silently on the holoscreen, his many eyes unreadable. The Zalvari had never begged. They had never surrendered. This was not an act of desperation, it was an offer. Kane clenched his fists. He turned to Voss. How long until Final Dawn activates? 3 minutes, she said. Once the countdown reaches 0, it'll fire automatically. We have no control from the bridge, only the command codes from High Command can abort it. Kane nodded. So they made sure we couldn't change our minds. The officers shifted uneasily. No one spoke. Kane turned back to Varesh. What's your way? Varesh's mandibles twitched in something that might have been sorrow. A ceasefire is impossible. We both know that. But if you refuse to fire this weapon, we can create something your High Command does not expect. A moment of pause. A moment where war does not consume everything. We will not surrender. But we will not strike first. A cold truth settled in Kane's mind. It wasn't peace, not really. But it was something that had not existed in centuries, a moment where the war did not move forward. He had seconds to decide. Kane stepped toward the main control panel, staring at the countdown. The numbers burned into his mind. 2 minutes, 32 seconds. If he did nothing, Final Dawn would erase the Zalvari from existence. Every living thing in this system would vanish, atomized in an instant. Billions dead. But if he tried to stop it, he would become the enemy of his own people. His fingers hovered over the emergency override panel. He knew what he had to do. Voss, he said. She met his eyes. I'm overriding the weapon. She didn't hesitate. I'm with you. Kane turned to the rest of the bridge. This isn't about mercy. It's about survival. If we fire this thing, we'll become worse than the Zalvari ever were. We'll prove to the galaxy that humanity doesn't stop. That will burn everything until there's nothing left. Silence. Then, one by one, his officers nodded. Do it, said Lieutenant Park, the weapons officer. Kane reached for the manual override, but the instant his fingers touched the console, the ship's security system blocked him out. Access denied. A voice crackled over the comms. Captain Elias Kane, you are in violation of direct orders from High Command. Stand down. Kane turned toward the holoscreen. Another face appeared, an admiral he had never met, a man who had been born long after Kane's first battle. You don't understand what you're doing, Kane said. We don't need to fire this weapon. We can force a ceasefire. The admiral's expression was blank. You don't have the authority to make that decision. Kane's blood turned cold. The man wasn't listening. He was just another cog in the machine, another link in the endless cycle. The countdown continued. 1 minute, 30 seconds. Kane's mind raced. If the override was locked out from the bridge, that meant the only way to stop it was from the core deep within the ship, in the reactor chamber where Final Dawn was housed. He turned to Voss. She understood immediately. We're going, he said. She nodded. Kane drew his sidearm. Anyone who wants to stop this madness, with me. The rest of you do what you think is right. A moment passed. Then half the bridge crew stood. The other half hesitated, torn between duty and doubt. Kane didn't wait. He turned and ran for the lift. They had 90 seconds to stop the end of an entire species. The lift doors slid open with a sharp hiss, and Kane sprinted down the corridor, his pulse pounding in his ears. Voss and the others followed, weapons drawn, boots slamming against the reinforced deck. Every second counted. The ship's automated security had already activated. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors in an ominous glow. Klaxons blared, warning of unauthorized personnel heading toward Final Dawn's core. Kane knew what that meant. High Command wasn't just watching. They were responding. Security teams will be coming, Voss warned. They'll try to stop us, Park added. Then we don't stop moving, Kane growled. Ahead, the passage split. One route led to the engineering bay, the other to the reactor chamber. Kane knew the reactor was the only place where they had a chance to stop the countdown. A sharp beep in his earpiece cut through the alarms. Kane. The voice froze him mid-step. It was Admiral Dresden, the same man who had locked him out. "You don't have to do this," Dresden said. "I know you think this is wrong, but you're letting emotion cloud your judgment. Stand down." "That's an order." Kane's jaw clenched. He tapped his earpiece, opening the channel. "Your order is genocide," he snapped. "And I refuse." Silence. Then Dresden sighed. "You were always one of the old guard, weren't you? A soldier from a different time. But this is the only way, Kane. The war ends today." Kane resumed running. "No, it doesn't. If we fire this weapon, it won't be an ending. It'll be the beginning of something worse." He killed the channel before Dresden could respond. They reached the final corridor leading to the reactor chamber. The doors were sealed, locked down by high command. Kane turned to Voss. "Can you get it open?" She holstered her rifle and knelt beside the control panel, pulling off the casing to expose the wiring. "I can override it manually, but it'll take time." "We don't have time," Park said. "Then cover me," Voss shot back, already working. Kane turned to the others. "We hold here. Security will come through that corridor. No one gets past us." They took position, weapons aimed. 50 seconds left. Then the first enemy team arrived. They weren't Zalvari. They were human. Terran security forces, clad in black armor, their rifles raised. They didn't hesitate. "Drop your weapons." One of them barked. Kane's gut twisted. He had fought for humanity for centuries, and now he was about to turn his weapon on his own kind. No. He wouldn't kill them. But he would stop them. The security team fired. Kane and his squad dove for cover, returning fire not to kill, but to disable. Park fired a stun round, dropping one of the guards. Voss worked frantically, sparks flying from the control panel as she bypassed the lock. A soldier rushed Kane. He barely had time to react before the man tackled him. They crashed against the wall, fists swinging. The soldier was younger, stronger. But Kane was older. Meaner. He slammed his elbow into the man's ribs, then drove his knee up into his gut. The guard stumbled, and Kane spun, slamming the butt of his rifle against the side of his helmet. The man crumpled. More security forces were coming. "Voss!" Kane shouted. "Almost there. 30 seconds left." A round clipped Park's shoulder. He grunted but stayed standing, returning fire with gritted teeth. The door to the reactor chamber hissed open. "Move!" Voss yelled. They rushed inside, sealing the doors behind them. The reactor chamber was a cathedral of power. Massive conduits ran along the walls, feeding into the glowing core of Final Dawn. The weapon pulsed with terrifying energy, humming as it neared activation. Kane spotted the control terminal across the room. "Shut it down," he ordered. Voss sprinted to the console and yanked open the interface. Lines of alien code scrolled across the screen, encrypted commands issued from High Command itself. "I can't access it," she growled. "It's locked remotely." Kane felt a sickening realization settle in. It had been a trap all along. High Command knew someone might try to stop them. That's why they had locked the bridge out. That's why Dresden had stalled for time. They were never meant to be able to stop it. 15 seconds left. Kane looked at the core of the pulsating, glowing sphere of devastation. If they couldn't stop it remotely, then they had only one option. He turned to Voss. "If we can't shut it down, we destroy it." Voss's eyes widened. "You're talking about overloading the core?" "It's the only way." She hesitated. Destroying the core wouldn't just stop the weapon. It would tear the Valkyrie apart. They would never make it off the ship in time. Kane. Do it! She cursed but obeyed. Her fingers danced across the console, rerouting power, overloading safety measures. Warning sirens blared. Outside, the security teams were cutting through the sealed door. 10 seconds left. The reactor began to shake. Energy flared, alarms screaming in protest. Kane turned to his team. "This is it," he said. No one hesitated. Then the explosion consumed them. Everything went white. A silence deeper than space itself followed. Then, slowly, Kane became aware of something. He was alive. The white faded, replaced by a cold, gray room. He was lying on his back, staring at a smooth metal ceiling. He sat up, his muscles aching. The chamber was unfamiliar. Bright white lights pulsed along the walls, the hum of technology filling the air. Then he saw them. Humans. Not his crew. Not Terran officers. People in sleek, futuristic uniforms, their eyes filled with something Kane hadn't seen in centuries. Awe. He swung his legs over the table, heart pounding. A woman stepped forward, her expression cautious yet fascinated. "Elias Kane," she said. "You're awake." He stared at her. "Where?" She hesitated. Then, "You've been asleep for nearly 1,000 years." Kane's breath caught. "The war," he whispered. "Did we stop it?" The woman exhaled slowly. "There is no war," she said. "Not anymore." Kane's heart pounded. The cycle had finally broken. But at what cost? And what kind of world had replaced it? Kane's mind reeled. 1,000 years. The weight of it was suffocating. He had expected death, welcomed it, even, but now he was here, in a future he didn't recognize, in a time where the war no longer existed. He forced himself to focus on the woman before him. She was tall, with sharp, intelligent eyes, her uniform pristine, almost ceremonial. She wasn't a soldier, not in the way he had known them. What happened? His voice was hoarse, unfamiliar to his own ears. The woman steadied him carefully, as if deciding how much truth he could handle. "You and your team overloaded Final Dawn's core. The resulting explosion should have destroyed the Valkyrie and you with it." "Clearly, it didn't," Kane said dryly. "No," she agreed. "The Zalvari intervened." Kane's breath caught. "The Zalvari?" She nodded. "Before the explosion, they transported you and your surviving crew to one of their deep space research facilities. Their technology was far beyond what humanity knew at the time. They placed you in stasis, believing you had given them a chance to break the cycle of war. When humanity finally made contact again centuries later, they returned you to us." Kane rubbed his temples. The words made sense, but they felt unreal. "Humanity and the Zalvari, we made peace?" "Yes," she said. "A fragile peace at first. But without the war machine pushing both sides to extinction, something new was born. Cooperation. Growth. The war that had lasted for centuries is now just history." Kane let out a slow breath. It was everything he had fought for, everything he had risked his life to achieve. And yet something about it felt wrong. If humanity and the Zalvari had been at peace for centuries, why bring him back now? "Where are my crew?" he asked. The woman hesitated. "Some of them were recovered with you. Others did not survive the stasis process." Kane's jaw tightened. He had expected as much, but the confirmation still felt like a knife to the gut. He stood, his body sore but steady. "And who exactly are you?" She straightened. "My name is Director Celine Varos. I'm with the Terran Concordance, the governing body of humanity." Kane's lips pressed into a thin line. "Terran Concordance. That's new." A lot has changed, she said simply. Kane took a deep breath. And what do you want from me, Director? Selene held his gaze. We woke you because we need you, Captain Kane. Something is happening. Something no one understands. A familiar tension crept into Kane's gut. What kind of something? She took a step forward, lowering her voice. There's something out there, beyond the edge of explored space. We call it the Silence. Kane frowned. That's not much of a name. That's because we don't know what it is, she admitted. It started as an anomaly, something we assumed was a stellar phenomenon. But then we realized it was spreading. Entire star systems are vanishing. Kane's breath slowed. Vanishing? She nodded. Not destroyed. Not conquered. Just gone. No debris. No bodies. No transmissions. Like they were never there at all. A chill ran down Kane's spine. What does this have to do with me? Selene hesitated. We've recovered fragments of data from deep space probes. Records of ships that encountered the Silence before they disappeared. Kane crossed his arms. And? She exhaled. Some of those recordings captured a name. A name spoken in the final transmissions of doomed ships. She met his gaze. They called it Final Dawn. The word sent ice through Kane's veins. That was impossible. Final Dawn had been destroyed. He had seen it die with his own eyes. Hadn't he? Kane clenched his fists. The war was over. But something else was coming. Something worse. And for some reason they had woken him to face it. Kane's pulse thundered in his ears. The name echoed through his mind like a ghost from another lifetime. Final Dawn. The weapon he had died to stop. The harbinger of genocide. It was supposed to be gone nothing but wreckage lost to history. And yet, here it was, whispered in the dying breaths of ships lost to the Silence. Slowly, he forced himself to speak. You're telling me Final Dawn still exists? Selene's expression was unreadable. We don't know. Bullshit, Kane snapped. You wouldn't have woken me up if you weren't sure. What the hell is going on? Selene sighed, her carefully composed mask cracking just slightly. We don't have solid proof, only scattered reports. But the signs are there. The energy readings, the disappearances, the way every trace of these systems is erased, it all points to something designed to do this. Kane felt a deep, sickening certainty settle in his gut. He had spent centuries waging war, watching as humanity pushed itself to the brink. He had seen what people were willing to do to win. And now, after all this time, something had returned. Something had survived. Where's the last known contact? He asked. Selene hesitated before activating a holographic display. A sector map materialized in the air between them, pulsing red over an uncharted expanse beyond Terran space. The rimward expanse, she said. No known colonies, no established outposts. But 3 weeks ago, a deep space exploration vessel, the Solstice, sent out a distress call from this region. The map zoomed in, focusing on a single, blinking red icon. Kane narrowed his eyes. What happened to it? Selene exhaled. We lost contact. Just like the others. Kane studied the map, his instincts sharpening. If Final Dawn was out there, if something had survived from the war, he needed to see it with his own eyes. I need a ship, he said. Selene gave him a knowing look. I thought you might say that. She turned, gesturing toward the door. Come with me. Kane followed, his body still adjusting to movement after centuries in stasis. They passed through a long corridor lined with glass panels, beyond which sprawled a massive, high-tech facility. Scientists and engineers moved with quiet urgency, surrounded by advanced starships that bore markings unfamiliar to Kane. Where are we? He asked. The Concordance black site, Celine replied. An R&D station hidden from the public. We develop unconventional projects here. Kane didn't like the sound of that. They stepped onto an observation deck overlooking a massive docking bay. Kane's breath hitched as his eyes locked onto the warship in the center. Sleek. Deadly. A predator of metal and light. Celine folded her arms. Meet the Excalibur. Our most advanced reconnaissance vessel. Fast, stealth-capable, and equipped with the best technology we have. Kane steadied it. The ship was different from anything he had flown before. Sleek where old warships were bulky, sharp where they had been brute force. It was built for a different kind of fight. Celine turned to him. It's yours, if you want it. Kane's lips curled into a grim smile. Who's my crew? Celine smirked. A mix of Concordance operatives and specialists. Some of them are eager to meet a relic like you. Kane huffed. Let's hope they can keep up. She handed him a data tablet. Read the files. Get to know them. You launch in 24 hours. Kane took the tablet but barely looked at it. His thoughts were already ahead, out in the darkness, toward the unknown. Toward final dawn. If it was still out there, if it was somehow responsible for the silence. Then his war wasn't over after all. And this time, he wouldn't stop until he finished it. Kane stood on the bridge of the Excalibur, staring out through the reinforced viewport into the vast blackness of space. The ship hummed beneath his feet, its systems running at peak efficiency. It had been centuries since he'd commanded a vessel, but the instincts remained, buried deep in his bones. He belonged here. The crew bustled around him, their movements quick and efficient. Some eyed him curiously, no doubt wondering if the war hero from the past was still fit for duty. He ignored them. He didn't need their approval, only their competence. A voice cut through the hum of the bridge. Captain Kane, we're approaching the anomaly's last known coordinates. Kane turned to the woman speaking, Commander Rena Ivers, his executive officer. She was sharp, her posture stiff with military precision, though he sensed the wariness beneath it. She didn't trust him yet. Drop us out of FTL, Kane ordered. Bring us in slow. Aye, sir. The Excalibur shuddered as it slipped back into real space. The viewport filled with a stretch of empty void, too empty. No stars, no debris, no planets. Just an unnatural, gaping abyss. This isn't normal, said Lieutenant Karras, the ship's science officer. She frowned at her instruments, adjusting dials with increasing urgency. There should be something here. A gas cloud, stellar remnants, anything. Kane's fingers curled into a fist. He had seen battlefields where planets had been reduced to rubble, but this was different. There was no sign that anything had ever been here at all. Scanners? He asked. Karras shook her head. We're getting strange readings, but nothing solid. It's like our sensors are struggling to interpret the data. That set off alarms in Kane's head. Send out a probe, he ordered. Full sensor sweep. A few seconds later, a sleek metallic probe launched from the ship's underbelly, speeding into the void. The bridge crew watched in silence as data trickled in. Then, the probe's feed cut out. Karras' face paled. We lost it. Kane's stomach tightened. What do you mean, lost it? No explosion. No impact. Just gone. Silence filled the bridge. Commander Ivers spoke first. Sir, I don't like this. We need to. A proximity alarm blared. Contact. Shouted a junior officer. Bearing 095. Kane snapped his gaze to the viewport. A shape was emerging from the darkness. Massive. Silent. It was unlike anything he had seen before, sleek, predatory, and utterly devoid of markings. Karras' voice trembled. That ship wasn't there a second ago. Kane's gut twisted. He had fought countless battles against alien fleets, had stared down the burning wreckage of dreadnoughts. But this was something else. Something worse. Ivers turned to him. Orders? Kane didn't hesitate. Raise shields. Power weapons. And hail them. A tense pause followed as the comm officers sent the signal. No response. Then, the ship moved. Not with the slow grace of a starship adjusting course, but with an unnatural, fluid motion, like something alive. A cold dread settled over Kane. This wasn't a Zalvari ship. It wasn't human either. It was something new. The comm officer paled. Sir, we're receiving something. Put it through, Kane ordered. The speakers crackled to life, filling the bridge with a distorted, fragmented transmission. A voice. A voice Kane knew. Elias Kane. His blood ran cold. It was his own voice. The crew stiffened. Ivers looked at him in horror. Sir? The transmission continued, the voice warped, wrong. We have waited. We have watched. You cannot stop what is coming. Then, for the first time, Kane heard something else beneath the distortion. Whispers. Countless voices speaking in unison. Familiar voices. His crew. His soldiers. The dead. Kane's grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. Battle stations. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun.